Shadow of the Erdtree represents the true turning point of the design philosophy for From Software. Taking cues primarily from the evolution of the formula crafted by Demon's Souls, Elden Ring facilitates a playstyle of aggression and patience. Whether this works as a structure is debatable. Combining the philosophies of two conflicting counterparts to an overall structure can have the tendency to overlap in terms of gameplay, resulting in a muddled execution. The belief that more damage and opportunities to punish is viewed as a positive for some games and then not for others creates this dissonance of rules for the players to follow. Elden Ring has fundamentally changed the way this genre plays, and it's hard to tell what's accepted and not accepted anymore. For example, the main discourse surrounding the release of Elden Ring, besides the obvious one, was the abundance of summons within the game itself. To be essentially gravitated towards a playstyle known as the incorrect form of play for these games in the past was jarring. It opens the floodgates to many disagreements and forums debating the correct way to play the game. Newsflash, there is no correct way. If you're having fun, that's the main thing. I believe Joseph Anderson said it best when he made his Elden Ring video: you cannot compare the experiences of summoning and not summoning because you're not playing the same game, but you're having a good time, so who cares? Okay, that was paraphrasing, but it's basically the same thing. The abundance of complex animations demonstrated by every main boss and mini-boss in Elden Ring is polarizing. It creates a canvas which allows for the player to experiment with builds and items people would consider a cheese in earlier entries, and as a result, the product has divided players. But the stone this caused was merely a ripple in the fandom. The DLC chucked a rock into the river, and we're all recovering from the fallout. Rumoured to be two DLCs, Shadow of the Erdtree was later combined into one whole package, resulting in a DLC which acts more like Elden Ring 2 more than anything else. The sheer size of this thing is colossal, consisting of 8 areas, 4 castles, 10 remembrances and 97 weapons. It's hard to describe the magnitude of the DLC at large. The use of verticality in the world is amazing, utilising the design principles in which From followed within the base game. That sense of wonder has returned which your first playthrough of Elden Ring captured so well. Every area you visit in the expansion is like stepping into a painting. The game knows what it's doing. When you leave that cave and step into Gravesite Plain, it harkens back to the same feeling as entering Limgrave for the first time. The Land of Shadow is gorgeous. Taking further inspiration from the art direction of Dark Souls, the underbelly of the lands between illustrates this twisted perversion when you strip away the golden fabrication of the waking world. The Shadow Tree engulfing the skyline, twisting and unnerving, does not welcome the player whatsoever. This is reinforced by the residents of the world, shadows who wander aimlessly through the fields of the dead. It's not a pleasant visage. The elevation of the map allows for variety to be sewn into each level of the landmass. The lands between, in contrast, has each area have a distinct colour as you navigate a completely flat linear world. The Land of Shadows has elevation within areas, increasing the scope of the world, allowing for more moments of wonder when you pull over the horizon and see that vista in front of you. It's stunning. Sprucely placed dungeons are dotted around the land, adding much needed variety to the visual design absent from the main game. Encapsulating the large catacombs essentially, you have these astral blue areas, furnaces and traditional dungeons. I'm so glad From returned to the drawing board for this point, because the inclusion of variety in these areas is what was missing from the base game. Previously stated, that sense of wonder and discovery is present in the expansion, which was so palpable in the main game. However, the term discovery primarily refers to the visual aspects of these areas alone. Yes, the design is stunning, stretching this dying land across a mass of impossible architecture, which feels as if it's erecting from the floor itself. But unfortunately, there are few rewards for your exploration within the expansion. Crafted on the predisposition of players reaching the endgame before even entering the Land of Shadow, it is strange that the player will encounter multiple areas in the expansion where they're collecting Smith and Stone wands. At this point in their playthrough, every Tarnish would have collected a bell bearing for smithing stone or somber smithing stones, so to fill the map with these underwhelming items felt like a missed opportunity. There are so many weapons in the DLC, but many of them you will not find in chests or random structures, which gravitate instead towards a reward being a smithing stone more than anything else. Very few moments rewarded exploration, which is a shame for the design philosophy of an open world game. Thought I'd just get straight to the point. The main draw of any of these games are the bosses, particularly the Remembrance encounters. Granted, some massive fights aren't remembrances for some reason. Sorry, Bale. But even some of the roaming and dungeon bosses have a presence to them where they could have easily been main fights in the base game. Anticipation relates to the time in where an attack is prepared. The motion consists of an enemy gearing up for the attack before the cord is released in a way. Looking back at the series as a whole, the use of the animation principle anticipation followed by reaction is utilised mainly as a build-up to the impact, rather than a principle in itself. A normal attack within Dark Souls 1 consists of about 2 seconds from build-up to release, rarely incorporating different timings for the anticipation to the reaction. The moves consist of adding more time on the release window rather than the build-up. Dark Souls' structure primarily focuses on separate moves rather than chains of attacks. The time between the attacks is round about 1.5 seconds. This is precipitated to work within the confines of the slower animations from the player. Rolls and attacks are considerably slower than later entries in Dark Souls 1. As the series has developed, the speed of the player and the enemies increased exponentially. This allowed the developers to experiment with more movesets which test the player's reaction time. Enemies evolved to incorporate multiple attacks within a single chain, negating the structure of attacks being described as single moves. Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne create chains of up to 2 to 3 attacks in a row. Some attacks will follow others within a punishable window between moves. The chain of attacks act more as follow-ups to other attacks rather than separate chains to break up moments of reprieve. The trajectory of the series was altered forever with the introduction of the Nameless King. The timing between anticipation and reaction swapped their respective frames for the build-up to the release. Longer pauses were implemented before the spring would essentially snap. This begun as a rarity in the boss philosophy, incorporated in a few bosses only. It made players time their role to interpret the reaction needed. This fundamental was then baked into the identity of Elden Ring while extending attack chains to 6 moves at the same time intersecting delayed attacks into those chains. From Margit to Fire Giant and Radahn, every boss in the game has delayed attacks of some kind. Delays are positioned after primary attacks. The reason for this is to test the player's skill with varied reaction times. This both works at the benefit of the game as well as the hindrance. On the one hand, players are able to test their skill within the game by memorizing the timing of the attack in order to dodge it effectively. However, this is not intuitive. Attacks in this genre follow the structure of anticipating the attack and then reacting to the movement through animation. Delayed attacks shift this philosophy to storing the attack in your memory. The moves are not built to be reactable, as the spring on moves are released so fast it's near instinct to dodge rather than reactive play. Instead, players are encouraged to count the time between the anticipation and the reaction. The move is built to catch players out the first time you see it. You can't predict when the move will release. The bosses in Elden Ring were the result of the design philosophy of Sekiro bleeding into the identity of the game. Sekiro exists on the belief that everything a boss can do is reactable for the player. This is illustrated through 2 points of the player's moveset. The first is the ability for the player to cancel out of an attack animation if it hasn't yet reached 10 frames. In the past, attacks were conceived of making sure that an animation had to be complete in order to input to the next command. Sekiro altered the formula in order for bosses to act more aggressively against the player while at the same time keeping the fight fair. This was balanced thanks to the second point of your moveset. The posture bar facilitated the playstyle of being able to react to the incoming damage both passively and aggressively. Sekiro's playstyle allows every boss to be as aggressive as they wish with no punish windows, as the player can progress the fight without inflicting physical damage. Taking this structure and translating it to Elden Ring, which still abides by the philosophy of Dark Souls, but this time there's a jump, creates more problems than solutions. It's understandable why they would want to do this. Look at the fluidity of bosses in Sekiro. Their moves transition to one another so seamlessly that unless you had the ability to parry would be hard to read or quantify. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Realising I focused on every part of the series except Shadow of the Erdtree, but trust me, there's a good reason for it, just bear with me. Moves which the bosses in Elden Ring execute rely on the parry mechanic of Sekiro to be satisfying to interact with. The removal of the stamina feature in Sekiro allowed the player to keep up with combos of up to 6 consecutive moves from bosses. When placing combos of this length in a game like Elden Ring, it is not intuitive to interact with the combo chains in their entirety. You're incentivized to wait for the combo to be finished in order to punish with the brief window given to you. Yes, you can react to all the attacks, but at the cost of consuming your stamina, which is crucial to getting your response attack off. Depending on the weapon you're using, this can be detrimental to your opportunity to punish the boss. For example, looking at a boss like Malenia, she has a great attack which consists of her flailing her weapon back and forth as it hinges through a spark animation. But your response is to dodge the initial swing. You then negate interacting with the consecutive swings until returning to dodge the final move of the chain. In that time, you have missed 3 moves in a chain because the playstyle does not give the player the tools to deal with this combo. This boss has been modded into Sekiro, and I think this clip speaks for itself. This is without mentioning the waterfowl dance. The boss works better within the confines of that game. Right, finally moving on to the DLC. Anticipation is still used to illustrate the delayed attacks which dominate the boss lineup in the expansion, to a successful degree and unsuccessful degree. Looking at elements which work well in this regard, we have the Radahn fight and the Mesmer fight. Both fights can incorporate chains of up to 6 attacks which flow from a standard attacks to delayed attacks. This isn't consistent as these numbers can escalate in some circumstances. The delay works well as the positioning of the attack is at the end of a long combo, informing the player that the chain is about to complete. That is for Mesmer more than Radahn. Radahn has moments where the combo feels as if it's ending but then continues for 2 more moves. Mesmer has this too, but it's not as egregious, instead focusing on a set pattern which will result in the spear dragging along the ground as it stabs you, ending the long attack chain. This is pretty consistent with it being the final move. These delayed attacks can be punishable for aggressive play, however they are readable in their execution. Delayed attacks need a respite period in which the player can recover from the onslaught thrown at them. This is where Radahn loses the edge of having a good structure for attack patterns. This move in phase 2 illustrates the point perfectly. She possesses this ultra aggressive high damage moonlight slash that can appear after a 3-hit combo or a 5-hit combo. This feels cheap to me. We're bleeding into another aspect of the combat system, but honestly you can't have one without the other, so here we go. Follow-ups are expected in this genre. They punish greed on the point of the player. Changing up an attack pattern can be a way of keeping a fight feeling fresh and interesting, however there are rules to this development. In the base game of Elden Ring, these are everywhere, mainly originating from the player staying too close to the AI. Varied attack follow-ups can be satisfying to learn, but it's still cheap. Any way you look at it, the system is splicing in artificial difficulty. The player has to have a moment where their patience is rewarded in order for the combo to be worth dodging. I talk about this point in my Liza P video with the Simon Manus follow-up. This retroactively makes the move a smaller window for an attack. In P, you can still get a light attack off, not an Elden Ring. Malenia is a boss with many varied follow-ups, but the one which is the most aggravating for the player is during her second phase. After a long attack combo, she can lunge at the player with a thrust attack, and then this can be the end of the attack combo, allowing the player to punish the boss. Or it can result in the player then continuing this attack chain where she will leap up into the air and then crashing down to create a small scarlet rock crater. I hope that the comparison to Simon and Malenia is obvious. Simon, you have to make sure that you do not incorporate a heavy attack, whereas Malenia negates the punish window entirely, even going so far as sometimes not resting after the landing, continuing her onslaught. This destroys this attack being a consistent punishable window for players because it's too risky. Going back to the DLC, have a look at this. Oh! Nearly had her. This is ridiculous. Normally after the lunge frost attack, it results in a follow-up where she spins the sword around her wrist. Love this animation by the way, resulting in a delayed attack which then transitions into a flame explosion from her left weapon. What happened here? There's no tell for this sudden massive shift, resulting in a chain going from 5 attacks to 9, not to mention the ultra fast 180-degree rotation of the boss to catch you out. I also want people to know this was using the Resurrection mod. At this point I was in possession of 15 Shadow Tree levels and a character level of 149 with a magic negation talisman, and she's still doing insane damage to me. Every attack chain may have beautiful animations in where each one looks stunning, but in terms of readability, it's not great. The most readable attack in this fight is her overhead slam of 2 swords. Despite it being a delayed attack, you can see when the attack will have sprung off. Even during reprieve moments where you can punish her, it's hard to read if she's done with an attack. This should give context to how unbalanced some of the bosses are if this was a good example. Dancing Lion has an incredibly fast, non-intuitive projectile throw in phase 2. The move consists of them flying up into the air and shooting a lightning bolt at the player so fast it's hard to quantify what just happened, to then placing an AoE pocket around the arena which explodes. Dancing Lion has many delayed attacks with the chomping of the mouth which can result in every attack they land on you after healing them. Delayed attacks within the fight consist of appearing halfway through the combos, such as a backwards kick which is a follow-up after the front bite. This move chain makes the boss swing around so quickly you would be forgiven to thinking it had lost aggro on you. Instead, it's similar to Margit's tail swipe where it's a gap closer and a transition into the next combo. Bale has one of these too. Their jump attack is another instance of the anticipation frames being more than the reaction, slamming down lightning quick to where, thanks to the camera, you can't even see the land point. It's punishing to be sure. Bale has a grab attack which has a high anticipation window and a minimal reaction window. His held lightning wing move is also another gotcha moment with this timing. The explosions on the floor negate the fact of being able to be seen, which rely on timing through rope memory rather than reaction. Bale is... nah, you know what, we'll get to Bale. Gaius has lance wings that are used to catch the player off guard with more anticipation than reaction. Who cares, Gaius has terrible hitboxes and I think everyone's agreed he's a write-off. It's also funny that Gaius is the only main remembrance boss where you have Torrent and everyone has decided to fight him on foot. That's because horse combat is in dire need of some iframes to make it interesting. Finger Mother is, nah, again I can't be arsed. Laser Beam, which has a gotcha moment where it will fire too late, delayed slams downs, normal slams downs make the boss hard to predict and read. Romina, or Romina, I genuinely don't know how to say her name, I'm going to go with Romina, has the Pierce from above, which is fast, but at this point there's been so many of these moves that you just start to dodge it instinctively rather than reading at this point. Midra is a weird case. His attacks are delayed attacks which flow into normal attack combos. This works exceptionally well as a basis for reading patterns, but can result in them being too easy to quantify. Midra is on the other side of the coin, that being a great boss animation wise, but you don't learn him, it's just instinctive dodging which can be rather simple in its design. A good fight though. Mesmer Phase 2 has the triple snake bite. This has a strange delay where the roll has to be executed with a small margin for error. Not bad, but definitely hard to read. Anticipation and reaction are the hallmarks to boss design, but when they are lent on so heavily to inflate difficulty and to roll catch players, it can become infuriating, instead resulting in players dodging and panic rolling trying to anticipate moves with less than 8 frames from attack to impact. It's rampant through the DLC that stop fights becoming intuitive to be able to learn as you go, but rather making the player die to them through the obscene amount of damage the bosses do. This doesn't incentivize interacting with them at all, concluding with some players spacing themselves from the boss and waiting for the move or the chain to conclude. The camera is a joke at this point. The fact that we have been complaining about this since 2009 is just ridiculous. In all of From's titles of this genre, there is only one game that has managed to balance this problem and is still yet inconsistent. Sekiro incorporated a dynamic lock-on camera that changed the perspective depending on the distance you were away from the boss. Look at the Guardian Ape fight for example. The team understood that this was a very big enemy, and as such the camera is pulled out far enough to where the player can actually see the entire boss. Playing the mod where you fight Malenia in Sekiro, and I think this says it all. Bosses have become these acrobatic flying machines that crane the camera up, resulting in the vision of your character being completely compromised. The small field of view makes each boss feel like that meme of Willem Dafoe. You all know the one. The DLC has not fixed this point in the slightest, and I don't understand why. It's baffling when comparing Sekiro to Dark Souls, Bloodborne or Elden Ring. Why isn't the lock-on dynamic in none of these games? Dancing Lion is modelled where the front half is thicker than the back. The odd shape of the model makes the camera confused of what to track. Placing the point of origin under the neck makes the camera only responsive when the boss is currently in front of you. This is before factoring in the flipping the boss can do, where it will surround the entire screen. What became an annoyance becomes a detriment in some states of the fight. The lightning form this boss takes is hard to quantify when this move is happening, leading to panic rolling. Panic rolling is the unfortunate factor of not understanding a boss's moveset yet, which you eventually grow out of, as it were. You don't in the DLC. Thanks to the boss being so high and the AoEs on the floor, you don't have time to lock off to see where you can stand not to be hit by the lightning. Because the boss is taking up all of the screen space at the time, I don't understand how these bosses were tested and were then decided that they were fine to implement into the game like this. The Lion's Breath attack up close is terrible. You cannot see what you are doing, resulting in rote memory taking over to combat the move. Bale is just as bad. If you're not in front of him, the camera wilds out completely. Framing is everything to keep the boss fair for the player to read. Why does Bale only have one lock-on point? Every other dragon in the game has 3. Why can't you target his broken leg just to make the camera more bearable? It results in the player having to stay in front of him at all times, but Bale's moves make sure that you can't do this. Again, we will get to Bale. The camera already has a solution and I don't understand why it hasn't been implemented yet. Big enemies and bosses are not programmed to facilitate this type of camera. I mean, they never were, but it's worse than it's ever been. Genuinely, I think this is the last time we will see this combat system because it's so outdated in the boss and enemy philosophy that you need to go through mental gymnastics to defend it at this point. It needs to change, and that all starts with the camera. Memory is an interesting aspect to boss design. We all find it strange and a meme at this point that your first attempt with a boss will be your best. This is all due to the lack of memory. When you enter a boss for the first time, you rely on adrenaline and instinct to carry you. You are not trying to decipher the time taken between attacks to evade because you are instinctively dodging. It's an interesting case study where the player works better with less information to quantify. Procedural memory then takes over when players take a rest and return to the fight. During this time, boss movesets are stored within your memory rather than constantly taking in more information run after run. This is why when you return a day later after resting and storing that memory, you will play better than the day before because it's been baked into your rote memory. Why am I talking about memory then? Because this genre has relied on the idea of memory to beat bosses rather than reaction as time has gone on. I once again talk about this fact in my Liza P video. The fight with Andreas has his left hand side covered by his body, making the visual obscured to react to the attack when it comes out. I talk about timing being a fine combatant to this point, which yes of course it is. For single moves of a combo this is fine, as you're only expected to memorize one move's timing. Reaction play is visual play. You start to get into the territory of obscuring moves without any other sense to tell you what's going on, such as sound to combat them. The encounter is running off rote memory alone. This problem relates to the camera more than anything. Fights such as Radahn off horseback are too big to even see every attack coming at you, making rote memory the way to go. The main point of this contention is, why should this matter? This all comes down to your tolerance with this stuff. Players may encourage memorizing movesets rather than visualizing and reacting tells, and that is fine. But in a fight such as Bale or Dancing Lion, where the camera goes berserk, you are forced to either panic roll or roll perfectly through memory alone. The fight then completely relies on your memory rather than visual animation. Animation is the bedrock as to why fights work in this genre. Negating it and making players rely on rote memory is a problem rearing its ugly head. It's not a major problem yet, but it has the potential to be. Now, I want to preference this by stating this point isn't saying that you shouldn't have to memorize a boss pattern, because that's obviously a stupid take. Souls-likes thrive on players learning a boss moveset in order to perfect them, as it were. Hell, this is Sekiro's bread and butter. No, my point is relying on players' memory of a boss to combat bad camera work and other elements such as the model of the boss obscuring your view. Yes, you can dodge from rote memory alone, but at that point you're on your way to doing a blindfold run. Now, you could come back to me with, wow, so a complaint is memorizing movesets? Wow, original. No, I hope this section isn't making people think this is what I mean. It's the obscurity of an attack relying on memory alone to combat them instead of animation, which is the problem. Designed to punish the player if they are in the vicinity of an enemy, input reading became a tool in From Software's design after Sekiro. Input reading is the clearest form of artificial difficulty for an example in this video. The response is after the enemy has backed off, you have a rest period in order to heal before continuing the onslaught. However, the boss now input reads this decision and, as a response, can counter the heal with a well-timed projectile throw. Clear examples of this are Margit, Draconic Tree Sentinel, and Godskin Duo. Some have melee responses such as Melania. Her animations can alter between the lunge and the flail move. Thanks to Zelly the Witch, we can see that the animation for when the boss or the enemy begins the reaction to you is your button press. This is completely ludicrous as an AI decision. A projectile can be thrown super fast, leaving the enemy to then react to your next input and advance up to the player. Bosses consist of long attack chains and fast reactions needed to combat them, so it's a mistake that chugging a flask in Elden Ring is a second longer than that of Sekiro. Sekiro's input reads are all melee moves anyway. The most dangerous input read is with Ishin, as he will leap into the air and slam his spear down on the player. Thanks to Sekiro's time from heal to dodge, the window for reaction is not that small, meaning the player has ample time to avoid the attack or even parry. Elden Ring's time from heal to backstep is 2 seconds and 22 milliseconds compared to Sekiro's 2 seconds and 13 seconds. That's losing 9 frames of reaction time. I know this may not sound like much, but the main duration of the animation is from the chug, so to evade has less frames, meaning you are less likely to get hit from an animation than in Elden Ring. These are important factors because bosses in Elden Ring work at the Sekiro tempo when it comes to combos and speed. Shadow the Erdtree uses input reading with some bosses, which feels very cheap indeed. Some moves, it's clear that From knows the exact frames you're given from the chug, so bosses like Dancing Lion capitalise on that. Their leap attack can happen straight after the chug and will last from jump to impact for about 1 second and 15 milliseconds. The gap closer is cinematic of course, but a gap closer which leads into a next attack during a heal window is very punishing. Animations for the Dancing Lion last rather long compared to other fights in the DLC, so it's nice that the downtime for the player to punish is generous, combining moves which flow into each other with some attacks lasting up to 6 seconds, then have a respite after which consists of the same time of the attack to impact. Realising we've moved away from input reading, so we'll stop it there. Actually got quite positive for a minute there. Enjoy it, it's one of the few times this happens. Another boss which illustrates this fact is once again Radahn. The move in question is a fast Moonveil slash. What's curious about this move is that it's seen throughout the whole fight to punish far play. The timing consists of about 2 seconds from animation to damage. The same animation is used when you chug a flask, but the game decides that it's going to play the lol I've got more dex than you now so my cast is faster. Only in this circumstance. A very clear example of input reading being an unfair mechanic. The timing of the animation changing is a cheap way of catching out the player. I understand why the change is there, it makes the player critical of their positioning and when the enemy is mid-animation to create an optimal window to heal, but genuinely, input reading just sucks. Mesmer doesn't have it, Midra is quite egregious as well with the Madness laser beam. Genuinely, Midra and Mesmer represent the glaring problem with this combat system through their movesets. They are fair and have tells which are readable for the player, and this is a problem when it comes to the difficulty of the game. The introduction of the stamina bar in 2009 introduced a depth to the combat of this genre that at the time was revolutionary. The expectation for players to manage the stamina as well as being locked into an animation created a sense of planning to encounters. The mechanic added depth to the player's kit as they fought the bosses. Dark Souls then repeated the process, but the bosses were more melee focused rather than gimmick orientated. Bloodborne evolved the combat system through players being encouraged to fight as aggressively as possible. So yes, you were still managing stamina, but the rally mechanic introduced a new tree of combat if you were. As the series then progressed, we reached Dark Souls 3 where weapon arts were introduced to the player. The arts added variety but not depth, they felt like the lesser version of trick weapons to be honest. Sekiro then had a radical departure where they negated the stamina bar completely, creating a skill system which begins with the Mikiri counter. Enemies which work on a basis of set animation patterns which incorporate staples into their code, such as sweep attacks and jabs. Having a visual indicator for the perilous attacks as well as a sound cue allows players to anticipate the move in question, but thanks to the icon being the same, you still have to pay attention to the animation at the time. The jump added depth to the combat as it allowed for the player to increase the posture gauge on enemies while jumping on hits. The posture system having a visual indication of how far the enemies were to a death blow was a great design, mainly because that was the point of the combat system. So a constant indication encouraging the player to be on the boss at all times to stay locked into the fight was a good decision. The resurrection mechanic introduced for the first time was an excuse for a boss to have a combo which needed to be seen first to understand, because you have the cheap death and then come back from it and learn from it. Also, after changing phases, you get the resurrection back, so it's a fair system. Sekiro developed the combat so much, it's such a shame that Elden Ring regressed so far. My favourite response to Elden Ring mechanics is when the community says, well, it does have a rally mechanic, and it does have a posture bar, and it does have a jump attack. Yeah, saying Elden Ring has a rally mechanic is so nuts to me. It holds the same weight as the connected world in Dark Souls 1 is bad because you can warp. The rally mechanic is not part of the base moveset of Elden Ring, as it's a reward of a great rune after defeating Melania, which you will definitely be doing at the end of the game. This isn't a good response. The posture system in Elden Ring is also badly implemented for how the player will react with it. It desperately needs a visual indicator as to how far it is along until it breaks, or it needs an indicator for when it's about to go off, like Liza P. Unlike Sekiro, Elden Ring's combat system is not built around this feature, so maybe it doesn't need a constant bar at the top of the screen. So instead, to combat this, players gravitate towards heavy jump attacks to break posture. The sense that you don't know how much posture damage is being done per hit is concerning, so you find yourself fishing jump attacks if you're wielding a heavy weapon until it breaks. This isn't fun, and it just makes the combat boring as you're gifted iframes from the jump, which have more frames than the traditional dodge. So you're just avoiding damage and repeating the same move over and over again. Jump attacks do not feel natural to achieve. They work for shockwave attacks to gain the upper hand in the base game, but there isn't a consistency to this. Sometimes they work in the base game. In the DLC, some movesets transition too quickly to use this move. Maybe From didn't want something so visually non-diegetic, which could be hard to interpret with the many complex visual designs of enemies and bosses. If this was the case, then the game should have done more to illustrate what can be jumped and what can't through animation. Jumping is a great tactic to close distance with a boss while following up with a heavy jump attack. This is why using it to escape waterfowl dance works 70% of the time. As it stands, the jump feels clunky and at least is utilised better to an extent in the DLC. Moves such as Rellana's twin move Nuke, or Putrescent Knight's move where he throws his boomerang bone at you, by jumping it you close the distance. Jumping does not add the depth like the rally mechanic does, or the perilous attack response, because it's not consistent. It never feels satisfying to use the jump, the animation doesn't flow well with the rest of your movement, and honestly feels like something they just experimented with, rather than actually being implemented with the design philosophy to work with the animations presented by the bosses. It just kind of exists. Elden Ring is still Dark Souls when it comes to the movement. The tech really hasn't developed that far. However, the boss philosophy has, so From has to compensate for this by adding delays within attacks and longer attack chains. To make sure the player is still on equal footing with the boss, the stamina is the most generous it's ever been, but when you break down the fundamentals of the combat system, it still operates as roll, press RB, and then RT. Every single player has these mechanics. This is why I only talk about these aspects. Ashes of War, the game's version of weapon arts, trick weapons, prosthetic tools, and gamer points allow the player to have the quick step from Bloodborne as well as other aspects. But not every player will use this Ash of War. The quick step iframes are more than the roll. It makes the combat way more interesting as the aggressive nature allows for experimentation. But then, why wasn't this included in the base game's moveset? Surely Elden Ring, being From Software's blockbuster, would have wanted to show off everything past games incorporated for the greatest improvement to the movement system. Surely, right? When Shadow the Erdtree dropped, a tier was implemented that added the Sekiro parry system. Genuinely, you combine all of this, including the quick step, parry system, rally mechanic, you have the most in-depth, satisfying combat system ever seen in this genre. Every single problem move in the game, for example Waterfowl Dance, would be one of the best combos in the game thanks to the parry system, and at the same time building posture damage. The jump being incorporated organically with the seamless animation would allow the player to use it in the same way as in Sekiro. As it stands, the game's primary moveset does not evolve the combat system far enough to fight these bosses. For everyone commenting it's in the game, so it's part of the moveset, no, it's not. The game is an RPG, meaning players can have any build they wish, but the basic tools given to the player must be able to combat every move of the game, which is just not true. It was in the past, but it's just not the case in Elden Ring. The best way I can explain my point is, say you're playing in another game, I don't know, Skyrim for example, and you've built your character in a way where they have a specific stat, like archery. You've reached a door in the main quest. This door has a magical enchantment on it, you don't know magic, and it says go find this item to progress. You find the item, it's being held by Steve the Warlock, and he's like, yeah, I'm not giving this to you, and he's a main character so you can't kill him, and because the game just decides you can't pickpocket him either, you have to convince him to give you the item, but your charisma level is too low. Sorry, that was really stupid, but you get the point. That's the problem with From making a combat system, then implementing genuinely just fancier animated buff items to then saying, there you are. You just need to change your build to fight the boss we made around the moveset we gave you, but doesn't work. Do you see the problem here? In Sekiro, the main move you need in that game, which is not given to you, is Makiri counter, but this doesn't count. Because it's part of a progression tree which every single player will acquire. The style of play in Elden Ring is outdated and needed to have these factors which are present in other entries. And this would have worked, because it already did with Liza P. Any excuse to talk about it, literally any. Liza P has a Sekiro style parry system, Bloodborne rally mechanic when blocking, quick step, as well as its own tools which make combat deeper on the player side rather than the bosses, which is the best way to keeping the game fresh and interesting. Also, Liza P does not have a single move an enemy does which the base moveset cannot counter, even this one. No, seriously, you never need to roll out of the way of this attack. Surprised no one noticed this, doesn't matter because the game later implemented the rising dodge into the player's core moveset. This needs to be the last time we see the roll RB RT moveset in From games, because it has been stretched to its limit in the DLC. There is nowhere else this combat system can go. I think From realised this, which is why it basically implemented Sekiro's parry mechanic, and it makes the combat way more balanced. But overall, the moveset cannot implement interesting chains for the player to react to anymore. Malekith going up in the air is a waiting game any way you look at it. You can't progress the fight either offensively or defensively. You can only dodge what's being thrown at you, making the whole encounter not tedious, that's too mean, but definitely stagnant. If the parry system was in the game, moves like this could turn into this. Elden Ring has so much variety to the combat, but little depth. Again, proven by Zolly the Witch, the magic system, although visually complex, the bosses react to the cast rather than the impact, meaning they're still not equipped to deal with this system, which I think is the reason so many people don't enjoy this class. I'm not stating it's a wrong way to play, what I mean is that people may not find it as satisfying if the boss is dodging prematurely, meaning their challenge is negated through no fault of their own. The bosses are in desperate need of more advanced mechanics from the player side to utilise their movesets to their full potential. Character seems like a strange title for a segment, but I couldn't think of anything that communicated this sentiment better. From Software had perfected the art of telling a story through characters alone. At least, they did. Areas which contribute to this fact are the visual design of enemies and bosses, as well as their animations. Perfect examples from each game are as follows. Great Grey Wolf Sith limps near death and is reserved in his movements. The beast is large and strong, moves are deliberate and slow in their execution. Gwyn Lord of Cinder has a design where his appearance from the opening cutscene visualizes a larger-than-life figure, only to confront him and realise through his face alone the Lord has gone hollow. Artorias shows this fact as well. Although wielding his sword in his right hand, as the corruption has spread so far, his left hand is the knight's strongest, and he can't use it. His design and movement paints an image of a man who has lost all sense and reason while still maintaining his battle instincts. Moves are strong and purposeful while also lingering too long, showing his weakened state. Knight Artorias is the best character boss design in Dark Souls, hands down. Something like Fume Knight in Dark Souls 2 shows a more aggressive stance whenever you enter with Velstat's helmet equipped. Once again, wielding a great sword, his movements are heavy and the way he holds himself illustrates that point. Bloodborne has a wide selection of visually interesting bosses. Beasts all move in certain fast-paced patterns as well as hunter bosses. But looking at a boss like Ludwig, he begins the fight with a manic moveset reminiscent of the monsters from the base game. As phase 2 begins, he shifts into a sword stance, showing the human side of him being illustrated through calculated movement. It's all illustrated through nothing but animation. Dark Souls 3 experiments with more fluid animations to convey character. Dancer possesses a flow state move where every attack is a delayed attack with long wind-ups. Gale begins as a frantic old man crouched on all fours like a beast before consuming the blood of the Dark Soul and stands tall and intimidating, flipping in the air, crashing down on you, showing the change in ferocity. Sekiro illustrates the different stances bosses take to show their level of skill in result of learning from others. Genichiro is fast and aggressive, moving from each attack so frantically he cannot show what is needed within the foundation of swordplay, balance. His nature is so chaotic that it gets the better of him. Guardian Ape begins the fight as this flailing beast, mimicking perfectly the ferocity shown from an ape, with frantic smashes into the ground and rolling around the arena. Phase 2 is a drastic change in animation, showing that the parasite inhabiting the ape is nothing like the host. The moves flow with a set rhythm from attacks. The moveset is more basic as a response that half of the effort is being used to puppet a dead being, as it were. This is character shown purely through animation. Owl is old and cunning. Unlike any other fight in the game, he utilizes a moveset which forces the player to adapt to the oncoming attacks. His moves are crafted to illustrate a swordplay which is cheap and ruthless, stringing attacks together where his body will contort one way while his sword is performing another attack entirely. Isshin encompasses all the teachings that each example failed to capture. Balance. Every move Isshin performs is deliberate but not frantic in phase 1, always using his footwork to progress the advantage. Isshin is quick but precise with every sword strike, to the point when after you die, there is no continued movement from him. He will walk off as he does not hesitate and understands the mastery of the blade. Phase 2 introduces Isshin's skill with other forms of combat and the more ruthless side of his persona. The gun spam is never non-telegraphed or placed when the character is currently executing another move like Owl. It always comes after he has backed away, making the fight fair on Wolf. Isshin then, as the fight concludes, utilizes the lightning of Tomway, showing just how far he continues to improve his craft even after defeating said foe. Isshin is a masterclass in character design through animation and technique, incorporating everything the game has taught you into one perfect battle. The design philosophy of Elden Ring is amazing. The amount of detail that is presented in every single asset is stunning, but unfortunately, very few give off an impression of character, and that's because of something I'll dub the Gale philosophy. Gale utilizes the flip into the air to reach you. When you first see the attack, it is overwhelming as it's the evolution of Knight Artorias' flip, but compared to Elden Ring, these attacks feel like casual moves. Elden Ring has a jumping problem. So many bosses flip around with the movement of a gymnast despite their intrinsic weight. Margit, Godric, Malekith, Godfrey, Melania, Tree Sentinel, all of these fights have different builds and weight, and yet they all have the ability to jump up in the air as if their weight is a feather, and it takes away from the character factor of each boss. Margit moves in a way which does not resonate with how the character looks. His staff is used to walk around because he appears old and slow. It's like Attack of the Clones Yoda moment with how he moves, flipping back and forth, jumping up in the air. The moment where he anime jumps into the air after realizing you're a worthy encounter is also jarring. Even his line delivery when he makes this jump feels dissonant to the move itself. Margit feels more like a character from the lore rather than his moveset. He moves so much where you can't tell the speed of his movement. You have his slam move, which would make the player think he's a slow-moving enemy, but then he possesses quick dagger throws and flips where it's unclear what character this boss is. Godric is even worse. Great boss, but acts just like Margit. His movements are deliberate and slow, but then they're also fast. He'll flip into the air to then crash down onto you. He has God knows how many rigs for fingers and arms. The axes he wields move both fast and slow. Having both fights flip like crazy acrobats loses their identity and individuality. The flipping when you reach Morgott is really excessive, where you have to run back to him every time he does it. So many moves show him flipping like crazy. Morgott jumps so much where it's clear this is a fast moving boss, but I don't get character from his movement because everything in the game does this. The individuality is lost, making it clear you are playing a game. The bosses aren't characters, they're code. They don't have the identity to carry the fights. Fights that do are Melania, Rykard, and maybe Horaloo. The DLC continues this tradition to the point where barely anyone felt like a character but rather AI. The animations of the dancing lion are cool, but they don't paint a picture of the character as there isn't one. Gaius feels like every other horse boss with no individuality because, well, except for a jump. Putrescent Knight feels like a random encounter in the world, there's no character whatsoever. His moves act as animations to make your jaw drop, but then the fight itself becomes repetitive with the flipping of his body top to then the horse to then the body and then the horse, and god, this fight is so bland. For a Remembrance boss, the fight has very few moves, making this spin one of the most common you will see, and it's a dumb move, because like I said earlier, there's no punish window in between this move, so you have to wait for it to finish in order to attack again. Mesmer is another case of this problem. If most bosses in the base game didn't launch themselves at you and have insane combos which feel detriment to their design, Mesmer's moveset would have been unique, but as it stands, it's not, losing Mesmer his individuality through no fault of his own. Midra has a stance which represents the awakened flame within him and is described as delightful and freeing. His movements are flowy and commanding. Midra has a character to his moves and also includes a jump attack and lunge, and somehow this works. As a result, he feels unique and fun to fight. Having a cutscene helps with this as well. This is why Radahn doesn't have a character. She tries with certain moves like the twisting of her wrist, which makes her interesting as a sword wielder, but her overhead slam down is very similar to other enemies and bosses. Most of her moves are interesting to dodge, but I don't find that she has a character. Romina is possibly the most alien design in the entirety of Elden Ring, maybe Finger Mother, but then again her movement is just no, I hate this fight. This fight is the epitome of what people give a free pass in this company. Eldritch Horror makes it awesome, visually cool design, her moves are so unintuitive, and ads. I hate ads. But Romina moves with this dance-like flow state where her centipede form whips around to hit you on top of a melee moveset. The fight feels more like modern Quelaag, but Quelaag still has so much character through the build-up of reaching her domain. The area builds to this encounter. The Ra area does not build up to the fight with the Scarlet Rot aspect. Her area is rather bland despite the colour. This boss desperately needed a cutscene but comes off as rather forgettable. Bale has a great build-up, great presentation, ferocious, and is just a fantastic presentation overall. Yeah, believe it or not, the actual visual design and the pace of the moveset is great. Yeah, go Bale. Shadow Tree Avatar is another instance where it works as you kill more and more versions and the boss gets more and more exhausted, and the way the flower locks onto the player shows an actual hatred of the player. It's not a character, but it has a great presence within a fantastic arena. Elden Ring has an animation problem when it comes down to character, because all of the fights are clear that they appear as code rather than characters in their own right. I know all the bosses in all the games are just code and AI, but they had a presence to them. Overtune is a massive problem for this. If all the bosses are ultra aggressive, barely anything has individuality. Look again at another game in this genre. Liza P, make a tally chart at this point, has great character design through animation. The first puppet fights are aggressive, but move very deliberately through their socket puppet movements. The third fight is slow and heavy hitting with clunky moves through animation on purpose. That's character. The fourth boss is a massive monster mass, which moves like its weight would imply. It fumbles on every step. The fifth is a humanoid big man who has power behind his slams, but they don't change from making the player believe that he's both slow and fast. No, he's fast. And then the sixth introduces a massive robotic puppet that walks on his arms but doesn't leave the floor that much, to then go into phase 2 where they're introducing flipping and a very fast moveset. Seeing this after many bosses that stayed close to the ground makes the flips something to behold, and from that point the fights do jump up in the air, but they don't stay in the air that much until Laxasia. That's why they stand out and have character. Variety in movesets through timing and animation gives weight to the encounter. I am confident and I am ready for the backlash with this belief. Round 8 understand animation better than From Software when it comes to enemy and player movesets at this point. Another animation principle in which this genre has dipped their toes in is offset, the art of allowing one animation to lead into the other with a second's difference. The principle is used to allow smear framing more than anything within the medium. In Souls-likes, it's used to allocate extra attacks into a combo chain. The Elden Ring DLC decided to use the principle as a way of implementing as many magic moves as possible on top of existing movesets. The structure of the first phase of the DLC bosses are the warm-up, as it were, until phase 2 adds an element to their existing moveset. The The structure precipitates the fights to lose any resemblance of individuality as you see the AoE explosion, which signifies it's time to check the floor. Fights such as the Dancing Lion, Romina and Bale have moves which are just cheap, there's no other word for it. When I say cheap, I don't mean, oh that wasn't fair. No, I refer to the boss design. It's lazy. To state what I mean, I want you to take a look at other Souls-likes which are criticised for taking the first phase of a fight and adding particle effects to it in phase 2 and consider that enough. Shadow of the Erdtree did this. Dancing Lion has a move set that does not have that many complex moves, but thanks to the camera problem and the excess amount of AoE spam on the floor, the fight becomes difficult through external factors, quite literally. The lightning AoE exists purely to make the player back off from the boss. The intrinsic identity to Dark Souls is patience and stamina management. Bloodborne's consists of aggression, Sekiro prioritises precision, Elden Ring operates upon the Dark Souls combat system but with the stamina of Bloodborne. The stamina recovery is so fast that really you don't have to worry about the stamina management. Sometimes you do, but not much. So then why are the bosses built to make the player as passive as possible? The bosses have multiple coined get off me attacks. Why? If the combat system is built to facilitate long combo chained attacks through stamina management, why is the player incentivized to play passively? Elden Ring has an identity crisis, constantly flipping between multiple philosophies within the game itself. Romina is so similar to phase 1, all the player has to worry about is spacing. The butterflies surrounding the area in which explode rot across the arena is fine as a move. The lifetime of the animation begins at the same eye level as the player, making the move fine to deal with. Bar this, Romina phase 1 and phase 2 are so similar they could have easily been a mini-boss. Elden Ring was designed upon the foundation of prioritising spectacle over practicality, and no boss illustrates this better than Bale. Bale, being a massive dragon, already is a recipe for disaster when it comes to camera management. His immense size extinguishes the element of control throughout any phase of the encounter. Phase 1 by design of the DLC consists of a majority melee moveset. The fire move wonky hitbox is the only exception to this rule in phase 1. It is understandable why so many people love Bale. The dream of fighting a dragon like a normal boss in the franchise was finally realised. Bale could have been a boss to rival From's best. But as it stands, the sheer size of the beast on top of terrible camera moments, dodging into attacks only to be caught on his wing, which shouldn't even be counted as a hitbox at that point, fighting Bale on a fist weapon type is actually infuriating. Thanks to his head staying so high, the reach of the weapon puts the player at a massive disadvantage to that of a player who has a sword or other class of long weapon. The response to this problem cannot be use a different weapon. The game is built around the freedom to play how you wish with any build you want. One of the weapon classes introduced in the DLC was the fists through the dry leaf moveset. The jump attack spam has simplified this game to being an incredibly unintuitive experience. There is no precision needed for the move, and when you realise how busted this move is, you will use it to beat down boss after boss because of course you will. Phase 2 ignites the arena around Bale as he flips up in the air and crashes down. AoE explosions follow most of his attack patterns in Phase 2, which operate on an offset basis from the primary melee moves from Bale. But rather than appearing straight after the initial melee move, the AoE waits longer in order to catch the player off guard in order to punish for them anticipating the move. This is not fun. There is no visual indication for when the explosion will go off. You are acting on nothing but trial and error from previous runs to recount rote memory of the move timing. The visual clutter of this fight is too much. Moves such as his raw attack will send players off their feet, to which is then followed up with a lightning spam, which is the boss's primary get off me move. The fight also includes a move where Bale will leave a fire trail on the floor when he flies up into the air. The move in question has the initial impact of the particle effect hitting the ground, but then has a follow-up after Bale has moved away. Thanks to the camera being locked on Bale, on top of the brightness of this attack, you cannot anticipate this move through animation alone, and instead have to rely once again on rote memory of previous runs in order to understand the timing. AoE combat is not fun, it never has been. It's used to create spectacle for a boss in which the player will have to avoid once or twice during the encounter, but the point of origin and the radius is condensed down to the boss's vicinity. Moves such as Black Flame Frieda's Explosion, Gale's Cape or Headless Ape's Terror Roar The point of the move is to make sure the player is aware of their proximity to the boss. These are not classed as get off me attacks, as they exist as primary combos rather than being incorporated into an existing attack chain. From is moving down this path of making everything bigger and grander without anticipating the repercussions of what this will do to the formula and the flow of the gameplay at large. If there was one boss that encompasses every factor as to what I have been illustrating through the video, it would be Promised Consort Radahn. Positioned as the final boss of the game, the fight is hard. That's its main selling point. I don't want to focus too much on the storytelling side of the DLC, as this isn't what this video is about, but Radahn being the final boss falls into the pit in which From has recently become victim to: cognitive dissonance. Throughout the years, From have demonstrated their understanding of incorporating lore, story and player urgency very well. Dark Souls, the chosen undead, is forced to relight the flame in order to not go hollow. The game has shown the dangers of this process and as such makes sense as to why you need to accomplish this task. Gwyn being hollow was the only way the ending would make sense as to why you needed to fight him. Dark Souls 2, the Bearer of the Curse, is tasked to essentially bring about a better age of dark or light than what came before. Nashandra stops you from doing this. Fighting Nashandra is a necessity to being able to achieve this goal. Bloodborne, the player is tasked to hunt the beast without questioning anything that's going on, and as a result the player learns the truth about the Eldritch Curse and deals with the consequences. They must either kill Gehrman, not kill him, or kill the Moon Presence. Things get muddled when Dark Souls 3 is introduced. The player is told to light the flame or bring about a new age of dark. But the soul of Cinder isn't hollow and represents every player who has lit the flame, but they fight you whether or not you want to essentially do their bidding. The player's choice and the bosses are at war with one another. Sekiro makes complete sense, as the divine heir must be protected at all costs. Elden Ring has the player be called upon by the Greater Will, and then at every stop during the adventure, the Greater Will stop the player doing its bidding, going against its primary function. To become Elden Lord has no stakes with Miquella's story of becoming an omnipotent god. The land of shadow was sealed away, and everything that happens there has no connection to your story whatsoever. This is the main reason why the ending has been received so negatively among the fanbase. There's no connection to the journey you go on, unlike something like Artorias of the Abyss, and that DLC happens in the past. So the ending encounter has the spectacle of fighting Radahn as the sole weight to the encounter, and unfortunately, that's not enough. The fight with Radahn really isn't that impressive when you take away the particle effects of the fight. The encounter has a moveset that is rather basic, consisting of multiple attack chains that incorporate some tells which are incredible, and some that are not. The 5-hit offset chain Radahn does is the best move in the fight. The player is granted a window within this combo to gain the advantage a small amount. The ending shockwave concludes the chain well, allowing the player a chance to punish. Radahn is too aggressive, leaving very little room to reward your patience. The uptime of his attacks is insane. The small time the game allows you to punish him makes no sense. The response to this criticism is, so what, you want the boss to not move as frantically, making the boss easier? Why should the boss allow you more time to hurt them? Skill issue. Well yeah, that is exactly the reason. The combat system is not built to reward constant aggressive play. The reason so many people think of Sekiro when they talk about Elden Ring is because Sekiro's moveset is built for the bosses presented. These bosses do not need rest periods and aren't built as such, which creates a problem when the player is still operating with this outdated tools that require moments of reprieve. Every single boss should be able to be beaten with the primary moveset given to the player. Moves such as the cross slash are ridiculous, and I don't see why anyone should be defending it. The move has so many factors which make it hard to quantify, so if you're saying you can dodge it, good for you, yeah, I can too. But consistency is key and the move has none. To fully dodge this, you either need to interpret the animation before you've seen it, alternatively, you need to position yourself to the left side of Radahn's knee in order to miss the move entirely, or you can be positioned at a lower elevation in the uneven arena to dodge the move. These three examples, the player has to factor in timing, positioning, and coordinates. Do you see how ridiculous this is to do? The move may not do too much damage, making some players feel it's not a big deal, but as stated previously, the uptime for this boss is insane, meaning you may not have a chance to heal before the move appears once again. Delayed attacks are also present in the fight with his uppercut swing. It's used primarily after a long attack chain, looking similar to another move which requires a different timing to dodge that attack, and this obviously throws the player off their game when it's seen. Slamming down swords at different timings while looking the same isn't good design, it's just a cheap way of catching the player off guard. The jump in the air is a terrible attack. There is no anticipation for this second jump whatsoever. Radahn can decide whether he wants to jump once or twice. If you miscalculate trying to predict the AI, you will miss your window and potentially receive damage. This is not good design. No move should have no tell for whether or not it's going off. There is nothing the player can do to learn this, it just happens whenever the boss wants it to or not. We're fighting code and it's having more fun than we are. The anticipation and reaction for these moves are not that well telegraphed to the player, making rote memory take over completely. The 5-hit offset combo unfortunately ends with Radahn scurrying away, and the first time I saw this I was taken aback. The animation transition is so bad it looks goofy. His star grab is once again a bad move. The inconsistency of being unable to escape this move with a roll after seeing it is bad. The move in question isn't too hard to dodge, but if you're caught in the initial pull, the damage you will be taking is unavoidable if the player rolls. You can jump the attack at least in phase 1, good luck escaping it in phase 2, but my biggest problem is this is essentially the exact same animation sequence seen in Gaius' second phase, which is completely rollable, but for some reason this one isn't. There's absolutely no visual difference in these moves, so why should the player expect them to operate differently? The camera is programmed to tilt upwards the closer you get to Radahn. The reason is to present the boss with this presence of being larger than life for the spectacle, but in practicality makes many of his attacks unreadable, especially in phase 2. The character of Radahn is lost as he doesn't flow from move to move with much grace whatsoever or aggression as seen in the original Radahn fight. In my 10 hours of fighting him, I never once pictured the fight as anything other than AI, thanks to him simply acting like a shell the entire time. There's no emotion to any of his moves, leaving the fight as nothing but code on a massive uneven battlefield. Phase 2 at least fixes the flaw in Bale's fight with everything being too bright to see, as the arena turns the brightness down. The beams on the ground offset after Radahn's primary attack is lazy. The visual clutter increases the difficulty artificially because the player is unable to interpret what the boss is currently doing. This factor is then increased by Miquella being placed on top of Radahn, blocking the player from Radahn's animations altogether at some points. This is the most egregious example of rote memory taking over, as the player is expected to memorize the moveset completely from phase 1 alone, as the second phase negates the visual ability to see what the boss is doing at some points. This is genuinely terrible design. No fight should have the player memorize a moveset as if they're blindfolded. The beams on the floor do not feel that intuitive to dodge, because if you do, the next melee move will catch you off guard. The game incentivizes the player to move away from the moves to negate interacting with the chain entirely, instead just avoiding each move through positioning. The only time the moves will be interacted with are at the end of combos where Radahn appears to be about to remove his swords from the ground. The big AoE explosion will engulf the screen. The move shatters the perception that the player can roll with the timing learnt in phase 1. Changing timings on moves isn't a bad aspect to phase changes, but when the penalty for failure is so high, it becomes a problem. Radahn's clone attacks have 4 states. The first is possibly the best. The single slice towards you has the prompts to roll into the move and then roll again at the end of the chain. The added beams on the ground are not needed for this move, creating a visual clutter to the screen. The second one is where he phases through you. The move is safest to roll through, even though the animation would present itself as being too long. If you roll to the side, you will be hit. This isn't intuitive at all and is a trial and error discovery. The third is where he'll jump up into the air and throw multiple clones at you that are very difficult to roll with your current toolset. The way to dodge this move perfectly is to run to the side until the final one falls, and then you dodge into it at the moment it hits the ground, and then you roll again for the AoE explosion. The move does not feel as if it's been designed to be dodged like this, but who cares, we're way past this point after Waterfowl Dance. The fourth is after the meteor spam, which then leads into the clone slam and an AoE, so players have to position themselves to make sure they have enough distance from the boss by running away from the meteors, to then running to the side of the meteors, to then running all the way away from his clone moves, to then rolling into the final clone move, to then finally rolling into the final AoE clone move in order to dodge the move entirely. Why? I'm getting tired of seeing guides for moves. Moves should be intuitive for the player to react to within the confines of the game and the tools supplied. The final moves I want to touch upon are the Pontiff 8-hit combo and the Meteor Slam. This move is bad purely for the sake of camera. The move appears after Radahn basically teleports towards you. The animation fluidity is bad as it doesn't have any anticipation before the reaction. The 8-hit combo introduces the player to a brand new chain where Radahn has fast attacks to delayed attacks to then leaping up in the air and to crash down into an AoE. On top of this, the light beams are still present after every swipe from Radahn, but thanks to the camera, the player has no clue as to where they need to be positioned in order to negate the damage completely. You end up panic rolling, which as stated previously is a clear sign of not understanding a boss's moveset, but it's very hard to learn when you can't see it. The Meteor Slam is evil. I don't care if this is the end of the DLC, this is a cheap death. Something like this would be fine in a game like Sekiro where you see it, die to it, and resurrect, meaning you haven't been punished for not knowing an attack before it's been shown. From has stated that they could lower the difficulty of their games, but it would take away from the sense of reward and accomplishment from overcoming the obstacle. This used to be the case. Now, From builds these games with difficulty being the key point to the design philosophy and not even fair difficulty. This is artificial difficulty personified in one boss. Radahn is a bad fight on almost every level and I think it's a massive stain on From as the developer. Simon Manus was criticised for having the same attack patterns for Phase 1 as Phase 2 just with added AoEs and spamming projectiles. So why isn't Radahn? Again, it's because it's From. Simon is a better fight than Radahn. He's readable, AoE explosions are not positioned with an offset where the player cannot react to them, and the melee combat. The difference between these two fights is night and day, while essentially being the same type of encounter. The reason it works in P is because the player is given the primary base tools to deal with this encounter without any additional items such as Ashes of War or consumables. From wanted something like this with a Dark Souls moveset. It doesn't work, and in its current state, it will never work. So it's at this point when I'm editing the video and Radahn has been nerfed, like to the extreme. No opening attack when entering the arena, the cross slash is now dodgeable and it looks great. The AoE light attack at the start of Phase 2 has been reduced and the frames don't go crazy. There's no follow-up attack after the multiple clone slash down, and the intro to the Meteor move no longer has the initial hitbox of the drag along the floor, allowing the player to predict the outcome better. All in all, the fight is actually very good now. Despite the cluster of particle effects and Mikola obscuring your view, the fight functions pretty good. However, this calls into question the result of why the fight was like this in the first place. The fight was clearly not tested if the developers backpedaled this much on the animation timing, chains reducing, and the radius of some moves. These changes have massive ramifications for the relationship between purposeful and circumstantial. The fan base has been split down the middle with this fight, with one side stating how broken this was, while the other insists this was the intended way it was meant to be fought and to get good. Well, what now? Because it's clear From Software did not agree with this ludicrous mentality. If you have to fight game mechanics in order to defend your argument, there's an issue. To have the literal developers come out and blatantly admit, yep, we screwed up, destroys this belief that everything From do is in the name of vision, and that this is how the games were supposed to be played. However, where's the line? Because I would bet anything that Melania was meant to have another second on her wind-up on Waterfowl Dance, but the moment has long since passed to change this thanks to the infamy the boss has coveted over the 2 years. The Elden Beast has Torrent now. These were clearly added in order to correct mistakes in the past, which is fine, but the systemic cult-like persona from the fanbase to defend these points needs to be addressed. From are not perfect, no developer is, but the pedestal in which this company is placed on for a large portion of the fanbase is concerning. From have stumbled many times, and believe it or not, if you see something that definitely should be countered and you have to input a set of responses on your keyboard or controller while the moon is in crescent form on the 4th of November while the breeze is swaying at 4 miles per hour and your character has a specific Ash of War so you can dodge the attack, it's blatantly obvious that's a problem. From need to be careful of what they make next. This is a slippery slope where their bosses are now being retroactively altered to the intended way they should have been fought. It's a clear example of From prioritising difficulty over vision. Elden Ring used to be one of my favourite games of all time. The construction of the lands between was mesmerising, as well as the exploration and the journey the player went on was enchanting. The bosses were by no means the best of the series, but there was a sense of cohesion to the package as a whole. However, there was always a sneaky little suspicion in the back of my head where I thought to myself, there are a lot of problems I'm ignoring here for my enjoyment. The DLC has shattered this facade and brought this suspicion right at my feet. I genuinely think the reason for this is that there is now competition to the genre at the same level as From. Lies of P presented itself so strongly through areas such as combat and boss design that it makes Elden Ring look even worse. Factors such as readability of attacks have been thrown away in favour of spectacle. Character has been pushed aside to make room for crazy acrobatic movesets that are dissonant to the characters they're assigned to. Fights used to hold a weight of importance through character alone. It's all gone and it's such a shame to see. There's no intricate movements of characters from bosses such as the different reactions to either being Ornstein and Smough, Nameless King seething with pent up rage when he stabs the Drake, moments in bosses such as Artorias pausing to adjust his arm, King of Puppets dropping his arm while the other one loads up the gun before picking it up again. These are all micro-expressions that make AI feel real. There is next to none of this in the DLC, and it shows that the aggression seen from Dark Souls 3 was the only character trait that followed into Elden Ring. The response to the DLC has been mixed, and it's understandable why. The DLC does not facilitate every build to be viable within the confines of the bosses and enemies. The Erdtree fragments do not help this matter. Deciding to create an upgrade system which balances every stat equally in a game where player freedom for build variety was a mistake. Genuinely, I understand why it was implemented, but it really didn't have to be. Difficulty of bosses isn't in movesets anymore, it's dictated by damage output and receiving said damage. The DLC Vigor level is recommended to be 60. Why? Why should a boss do so much damage? Difficulty is not interpreted by how hard a boss can hit you, it should be the complexity of a boss's moveset while still being readable for the player. That's where the difficulty players have experienced comes from, higher damage output. Why learn a move if it will one-shot you so frequently? How can you learn when to anticipate the move and when to react to it? The DLC is built on the notion that players will have these stats. I completed the DLC for the first time with 40 Vigor and it wasn't easy. The Erdtree fragments helped, but they're balanced terribly. Fighting earlier bosses with 15 fragments was a joke, but by the game's own metric, if you're struggling, go find more. You can't determine how much easier the encounter will be if you decide to collect the fragments. Their implication in the DLC created more problems than solutions. The discourse on Shadow of the Erdtree is the most confusing it's ever been. Everywhere you look, the fanbase is either telling people to get good, skill issue, or that it's too hard. I don't think people understand what everyone is finding difficult anymore, because from a moveset perspective the DLC isn't that difficult. Disregarding points such as the moves which are annoying to dodge, the movesets on their own are not that challenging. That's why there are so many bosses that rely on AoE particle effects as well as longer attack chains of the same moves to keep up the difficulty. I don't want to interact anymore with the discourse of this game, which, thinking about it, making a video with a comment section is probably a bad idea. But there are serious issues that need to be addressed in the future if From is to do another game like this. The combat system is a dinosaur in the current landscape, and it's never been more obvious than it is in the DLC. Elden Ring has an animation problem, and the worst part is, I don't think it cares that it does.